So the first project up that we'll talk about is Carpenter, and I'm actually going to hop out of this real quick and show you the existing plan just to give everyone kind of a baseline and a reference to look at for how this is functioning. So you have Joslyn Road over on this side, Flint Ridge down below. Here's the main entry to the school right here. And so currently, for parents and everyone to come in, you're coming in here and then you're turning into this first drive and coming around the loop, and it's a very congested system. We have buses and parents kind of all cohabitating in the same place, and it's a very congested area. And then up to the north here is the open property that you recently completed the purchase on. And so if we go back into the proposed layout for what we're planning to do, you can see that starting at the top, up where the property purchase occurred, that gives us access back here, and that's where the new bus loop is going. So up off of Joslyn, there'll be a dedicated student bus loop with staff parking included in that. And so then those students will be able to enter into the building here. There are no parents in that drive area, so it's a completely separate, and what some of the things we try to do at all these sites is really separate bus traffic and parent traffic as a safety measure, so they aren't really interacting. And then coming back down around to the south side of the site, you can see kind of ghosted in under here. This is that old in drive location that you currently is where parents turn in. We are pushing that further down to the out and having this be the in and the out for the parents. And then we are creating a much, much longer queue for parent drop off. And so this does a couple of things. By pulling it down, we're pulling traffic away from the intersection, and we're also providing a lot more room on the site for parent cars to wait in line to drop their kids off at the front door. And so this should help alleviate a lot of the traffic concerns at the intersection by pulling cars off the road and pulling cars onto your own site.
As well as obviously pulling the buses out of that mix entirely. Right now the buses are mixed in there as well.
So in between that loop, you can see there's a visitor parking area, and there'll be a sidewalk connection here that takes people right to the front door and your main entry here. You can see kind of this existing parking area will remain for staff fairly unchanged. And then on this side, there will be some playground improvements, replacing some old and heavily used play structures as well.
Have we looked at anything, I'm sorry to interrupt you, have we looked anything into if we potentially ever acquired that other piece of land, how we would use that?
You're talking about the house?
Yes, sir.
Here? I think we were intentional in really not addressing this area yet.
Okay.
In that whatever solution, be it, if you need it for future building additions or if you need more parking, we're not going to spend too much money in a place that would require it to be changed, 2 or 3 years down the road, or whenever that's. So I would say our planning has been in kind of intentionally leaving it.
Stay away from it.
Yeah.
I got you.
We have had some basic discussions about there's a lot of potential there. You have all kinds of potential, whether it be additional site development or if there was additions of the building. It's very easy to add into here. So we haven't necessarily delineated that. We've had basic discussions that we have a lot of potential there to add on.
It just seems like you can almost take Flint Ridge right out of the equation if you had that function there. But, I mean, just by looking at it up there, it looks like there's a lot of space. But I realize that's if, shoulda, woulda, coulda type thing. But just wanted to make sure that that's on your radar.
Yeah, it is. The property line right now that you don't own is right by your building. So we can't add there now.
Right.
The setbacks the state would require us to do won't let us. But if you purchase that home, lots of potential.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess a question could be, and Marion's not here, so I'll address it to one of the two cabinet members, is we're obviously able to use the north end of the property. What are the restrictions for usage, like if we were to come up with before we took control of the whole site?
Thank you. What are the what could we do? He just mentioned, hey, you could build over this way. Are we locked out at the current fence line? So if we could just report back to us at a future meeting of what was our agreement? They continue usage of the house, but I just don't have all those specifics. I don't remember what everything was. So John or Marion can talk to us in the future.
And I'm sure that's in the buy-sell agreement, because we do have the option on the other, we actually have a purchase agreement for the other piece. We just have a time frame of when we get possession.
Yep.
Okay. Then the only other comments I would have on the site plan is that we're also, working with Wes on developing safe routes to school to make sure that, our sidewalk connections come all the way up to the road so kids aren't crossing lots of lines of traffic to get into the building. We're being as intentional as we can about how we bring kids onto the site and how to get them into the building safely. Any other thoughts or questions on the site plan, or I'll move on to the floor plans in the building? All right. Okay, so on the right-hand side of the page is the overall floor plan, and then we have two kind of enlarged views over on the left. I'll kind of talk very generally about the scope that's happening here, and it serves as a good template because Orion Oaks has a somewhat similar structure to the scope we're doing there. So kind of starting up front, we are doing an office renovation to create a secure entry in an enlarged office space. And then no additions up front, though we are adding kind of a protected area of a roof out front to help bring people in out of the rain as they come in and help identify the main entrance so people can actually find it. And that's a really important part of secure entries is, helping people understand where they're supposed to go and how they're supposed to get into a building is really helpful. So we'll improve that. And then in the back of the building, this line right here is the line between what's existing and what will be a completely new addition. So in that new addition, we'll have two classrooms, the STEM room, and a series of small group rooms or offices for, speech or social workers, small group breakout kind of spaces. And then immediately adjacent to all of that, we have the media center renovation, which is, again, kind of a complete renovation of that space, new finishes, et cetera. Building-wide, there are several upgrades happening here, so we're replacing all the windows in the building. They're old enough and energy inefficient enough that it made sense to do that, and that was a listed item in the bond scope. And then we're also doing a fair amount of finish replacements in this building, a lot of worn out floors, and some worn out ceiling areas, things like that we're touching as we move through the building. With that, I'll kind of zoom in and talk about each of the major areas of work a little more specifically. So up here at the main entry, we have created a secure entry, and this is the model that we'll use at all the elementary schools going forward. Tom spoke in his intro about how we had a committee develop this and kind of really work through to make sure this functions the way all of the entries are going to function in Lake Orion going forward. And so the way that works is, a visitor will approach the front door, they will be locked. There will be a button with a camera associated with it next to the door. They'll press that button. It'll be able to speak to one of the receptionists who can, hopefully see them out the window, but also see them on camera. The receptionist will then be able to buzz them into this vestibule. This back set of doors in the vestibule will always be locked. And so then visitors will need to enter in through this door into the office area where they can check in with office staff. The thought here is that, if they're just dropping something off or their child forgot their lunch, they can give it to the receptionist and leave without really ever getting into the rest of the building. Or if they do have business in the building, they can check in, get their visitor badge, and then they will be buzzed out by the receptionist through this door. So really, we're creating a fairly secure box in here where, no one's getting out unless they are allowed to by the receptionist, or if you have a key card or a badge that lets you get out of that zone. Does that sequence kind of make sense to everyone? You can always get out of the building, so, coming this way, the doors will always open free, so it's easy to get out, but it's more secure coming into the space.
And that's a requirement from the fire
Yeah.
marshal. We have to let people out, we just don't have to let them in.
Yeah. And this back door as well will be controlled, so that'll be kind of a card access in and out of this workroom area. And so the types of spaces that are in this office are representative of the standard that we've reached for all the secure entries. So you'll have a reception desk for about 2 people. There'll be a waiting area to accommodate 3 or 4 folks. Behind that will be the principal's office. There will be a conference room for about 10 people. And then there will be a hoteling office or a kind of a future office that we're planning for, that not necessarily every building has a staff member that's going to go into there right away. But if we're doing all this now, we're doing a little bit of work to, I wouldn't say future-proof, but just provide some flexibility in the space that if there's a need there, we have the space for it. And then every office is getting kind of a dedicated work area that serves the front office staff. This is not the workroom for the teachers. It will have the teacher mailboxes in it, but this is more, for the front staff to make copies, do their filing, and everything they need to do. Each front office area will also have the health room. They'll have a dedicated toilet, and the health room will have a little bit of cabinetry, a sick cot, and some chairs in there. One thing that does vary a little bit between buildings is this other toilet. So this is a staff toilet that we had room for in this floor plan to include, but that's not necessarily true in all the buildings. And then there's also a record storage space here for, CA60s or other storage items that need to be kept up there. And so this is actually, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the layout, but the original office was about half this size. So their whole office currently is about right here. And we are taking over the adjacent classroom to make this office more functional and bigger. And we are accounting for that in the addition that we're doing off the back and some of the other programming changes they're doing at that building to free up classrooms by, converting the computer lab into a room and that sort of a thing. This little room up here is currently used as an office, and thankfully we'll be able to take that back into more of a storage space. It's small, and that's a more appropriate use for something that's right up off that vestibule, so you won't have any people, right there anymore. Any other questions on this office layout or how that works?
One other comment I'd make is that we are changing all of these to have an entire wall of glass here. From a security perspective, all the recommendations are that the office staff can see where the entry is, where people are coming from the parking lot. A lot of the problems can be identified before they even come to the building. And so by opening this up, having good vision, they can make some decisions quickly that save you 30 seconds a minute, things that first responders really want. So there'll be a lot more vision out to the parking.
As far as site work there, I know that we had a flood there today coming in through the front door. When we're talking about changing that outside piece or changing the traffic patterns and things, does that also include correct grading and sidewalk and drainage and things like that for just things that have been issues for years to keep up, so the building stays in good shape?
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to go back to the site plan.
And I don't necessarily need specifics, but
Yeah,
that's part of this.
I think we're
too.
dealing with so much of this that'll all be reworked.
That'll
in
just
here.
be gone, yeah.
Up here necessarily, not a lot being done differently, but in the areas that we're touching, that'll all have different, drainage and et
Sure.
cetera.
Okay,
That makes sense.
cool.
Then moving on to the back of the building, as we talk, so here is that new addition, and a point of note here, there were originally no new classrooms scheduled for this building in the bond, but after, getting into the programming phase of all this work and digging back in kind of the district's numbers and what projections of enrollment were looking like, it became really apparent that there was going to be a classroom crunch at this building. And so two of the classrooms that were originally part of the Orion Oaks proposal, so the original bond called for 3 classrooms there, we have moved over to this building where we think it's a better use of how enrollment is happening. So these 2 classrooms are kind of coming out of that. And then down here again are those 6 offices that will really help to pull the student learning spaces, the small group rooms, out of some of the wide spots in the hallway or maybe some of the other rooms in this building that aren't necessarily appropriate right now for that type of learning. So this will be a big improvement to get all those small group spaces into their own dedicated rooms. Right here is the STEM space, so that is part of the addition. And there is a small office associated with that. It's an office/storage room for the STEM coach to kind of keep the more important items or things they don't necessarily want out protected. We've had a lot of great discussions with that STEM group. I'd say they've been really vocal and really engaged in developing what these spaces are going to feel like. And so really, this wants to be a really flexible space. You know, it's not necessarily just for science. It's a space for people to go to solve problems, you know, kind of regardless of what discipline maybe is using it. And so we're trying to keep it really flexible. There'll be flexible furniture in there. There'll be a lot of things like sinks and cabinets and open storage for bins for people to grab what they need to kind of solve the problem they're trying to solve. And another piece of that that's really important is we do have some windows along the hallway here. And they were really adamant that this be a space that students can see into and be excited about the work that's happening in there. You know, it's not just a bulletin board on the hallway that has a couple of STEM projects on it, but they can actually look in and see the work that's being done. You know, a second grader can see what the fifth graders are doing and say, oh, I can't wait to do that in a couple of years. They really want it to be an exciting space for people to go, and not just somewhere they go for 45 minutes every Tuesday or something like that. It's intended to be a much more active space than that, a much more kind of fluid space that people use as they need to solve their problems. So one of the things they also liked was this connection to the outside. So there will be kind of a patio space or area out here for that. And then there's also a great relationship at this school between STEM and Media Center. And so, you know, when we were doing all this programming and we were working with the groups, there were a lot of big ideas, right? You know, so part of that team was they said, well, we want to be able to do a whole grade level in this STEM room. We want to be able to do a whole school in this STEM room where, you know, suddenly it's twice the size of the gym. And that's obviously wasn't feasible, but as where we could, we tried to develop some synergy between that space and others to accommodate as many of those needs as possible. So here, it works out really well to have it be adjacent to the media center. We'll have a large opening to connect between the two of them, and that means when they're doing a large group activity or a big demonstration, they'll be able to move over into the media center for those bigger groups, and then when they're doing something smaller at a classroom scale, they can move back into the STEM room to do that. So that's a good segue actually into the media center space. So that whole area will get renovated. New book stacks, new furniture, new floor finishes, new ceiling finishes, new lighting, kind of a complete facelift and update to that area. And there are a couple of components to that space that will be present in all the media centers. One of them is the media production room. So that's the room that they use to do the newscasts in the morning. That's the room, you know, where they have the green screen set up. And a couple of schools already have kind of a dedicated space for that, but a lot of them were needing to pull stuff out of a closet, set it up, use it, put it away. And it was just a really kind of an onerous task and made it less convenient and less engaging to use that kind of technology that they already have. So making that a dedicated space, I think, will be a lot more usable, a lot more functional for them. Each of the media centers also will have a breakout room, and so that is a room that will have all glass on one side, you know, still highly visible from the media center so staff can observe what's going on in there. But that's, you know, that's where a small group of kids can go in and heads down and work on something, or if the media center is really quiet and they need to be a little louder, they can go in there and be a little louder. So it's still a controlled space, but it's, you know, it's a spot where students get to go and work a little bit on their own or in a smaller group. Let's see, so we talked about the two classrooms here. We are beginning to work through where the casework's going, where the marker boards are going, all that sort of stuff we had discussions on today. And then I guess one of the other pieces that we're working on are renovating some of the group bathrooms that are, you know, original to the buildings in some cases, that we're using some sinking fund dollars. Again, that synergy Tom talked about where it makes sense. Sinking fund had to plan to work on these. If we're going to be working in this building, it makes sense to do that work at the same time. And so we'll be doing some kind of renovations in those spaces to replace fixtures, replace finishes, make them, you know, more modern and functional again, where they're have been well used at this point. Yeah, good way to describe
Mitch,
it.
are those classrooms the same size, basically? I'm just curious.
New ones?
I can't tell.
The two new ones?
Yes.
Yeah, they're different proportions, but the same square footage.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't quite read that square footage on there, can you?
I can't read any of it.
Yeah, it's-
They are a little bigger than some of the classrooms that are in the building already, but we're trying to make them more appropriately scaled to the teaching environment today that you need them to be. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions on that layout or that work?
Very nice. It's great.
Great. Okay, so that's Carpenter.